All right, so are you ready to dive into a mystery that seems like it will never be solved? The Black Dahlia case. You know the one I mean, right? The one that's kept true crime fans up at night for decades.
Yeah, it's amazing how many theories there are surrounding this case.
It really is.
Like everyone wants to try to solve it.
Exactly, and we're going to try to do that today.
Awesome.
You sent over a whole stack of articles and a couple of true crime books, and even some newspaper clippings. So we've got a lot of ground to cover.
Okay.
The 1947 murder of Elizabeth Short, a.k.a. the Black Dahlia. It really gripped Hollywood and the nation.
It did.
And guess what? It's still unsolved.
Still unsolved.
So crazy.
It is, and even after all this time, new theories keep popping up.
I know, it's wild.
But before we get too lost in this maze of suspects and theories,
Right.
maybe we should start with the victim herself.
Yeah.
Who was Elizabeth Short?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's
Yeah.
easy to get caught up in the mystery and forget that there's a real person who lost her life here.
Exactly.
What do our sources say about her?
Well, she was a young woman, only 22, trying to make it in Hollywood.
Oh, wow.
The classic aspiring actress story.
Right.
A lot of the descriptions mention her striking looks, like black hair, blue eyes. She was, a classic beauty.
Yeah, and that's got to be where the whole Black Dahlia nickname comes from, right? I mean, she was this dark-haired beauty in the era of film noir. It just makes sense.
Yeah, definitely fits that whole aesthetic.
Yeah.
But one of these articles actually points out that the nickname wasn't used until after her death.
Really?
Yeah, it's kind of like a media creation.
Huh.
A way to make the story even more sensational.
Interesting. So it's almost like the press turned her tragedy into this Hollywood story in itself.
Exactly.
Which is kind of, even more tragic in a way, don't you think? Like they kind of robbed her of her real identity.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that behind all the headlines and the nickname, there was a real person.
Okay, so we've got this young woman full of dreams, trying to make it in the cutthroat world of Hollywood. What else do our sources tell us about Elizabeth's life? What was she like?
Well, one of these books, Severed, paints her as a bit of a social butterfly.
Okay.
She moved around a lot, always seemed to be bouncing between apartments and hotels, always trying to make connections.
So it sounds like she was struggling financially, too.
Yeah, she was.
That makes me wonder if maybe money could have played a role in her death.
Yeah, it's a possibility that comes up in a lot of the theories,
Yeah.
especially the ones that focus on her connections to powerful men.
Right, right. Those Hollywood elite. We'll definitely have to unpack that later
Yeah.
on. But first, let's talk about the day it all went wrong, January 15th, 1947. What exactly happened?
Well, it was a Tuesday morning, around 10 a.m.,
Okay.
when a woman and her daughter were walking through Leimert Park, and they came across what they thought was a discarded mannequin.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. Imagine their horror when they realized it was actually a body.
Oh, that's awful. That must have been terrifying to see. And that's how the whole investigation started, right?
Exactly.
With that gruesome discovery.
The scene was horrific. Elizabeth's body had been, well, the term they use in the reports is bisected.
Bisected.
Cut clean in half at the waist.
Whoa. I mean, that takes a certain level of, I don't know, callousness to do something like that.
It was very deliberate.
Yeah.
And the brutality didn't end there. Her face. She had been given what's called a Glasgow smile.
Oh, I've heard that term before. I'm not sure I really understand what it means, though.
Basically, it's a deep cut that forces the victim's mouth into this grotesque grin.
Oh, wow.
A truly horrifying sight.
Gosh, the killer clearly wanted to send a message with this. It wasn't just about ending her life. It was about humiliating her, torturing her. I don't know.
One of the articles quotes a forensic psychologist who says that this kind of mutilation often indicates a deep-seated rage or hatred toward the victim.
Right, yeah. This wasn't just a random crime of passion.
No.
This was personal.
It was. And there was more.
Oh, no.
The police reports, which we have copies of here, detail further signs of torture. Bruising, cuts. Some flesh had even been removed. It's incredibly disturbing.
Okay, you know what? I need a moment to process all of this. It's just, it's a lot to take in. I think maybe grabbing some coffee before we dive back in is a good idea.
Good idea indeed. We've only just scratched the surface of this mystery. So before we took our coffee break, we were talking about that crime scene.
Right.
And one of the things that I thought was so strange was that lack of blood
Yeah, you would think for such a brutal crime there'd be blood everywhere, but the reports mention the scene was remarkably clean.
Almost like the killer cleaned up after themselves.
Right.
Which just adds another layer of complexity to the case.
Yeah.
You know, this wasn't some heat of the moment thing.
Yeah.
This was premeditated.
Gosh, that's just chilling to think about, you know? The level of planning, the control, it just paints a very disturbing picture of this killer.
It does, and it gets even more disturbing when you consider what happened next.
Okay.
A few days after the murder, the Los Angeles Examiner got a package.
Wait, the killer mailed something to the newspaper?
Yep.
Oh, that's straight out of a horror movie.
It gets creepier.
Oh, no.
Inside were some of Elizabeth's things.
Okay.
Her birth certificate,
Oh.
some business cards, even her address book.
Wouldn't those things be covered in fingerprints?
Right. You'd think.
Potential evidence.
That's the really chilling part.
What?
The package and everything in it had been wiped clean
Oh, wow.
with gasoline.
Wow. The killer was meticulous.
Yeah.
I mean, covering their tracks and making sure they left no trace behind.
It seems that way.
Was there anything else in the package?
There was a note,
Okay.
just a few short lines,
Uh-huh.
but it's one of those things that sends chills down my spine every time I read it.
Now I'm really intrigued. What did it say?
Here is Dahlia's belongings letter to follow.
Wow.
A direct taunt
Yeah.
to the police, to the media, to the public.
Did that letter ever actually show up?
Well, that's a mystery in itself.
Oh, really?
There's no official record of another letter from the killer.
Yeah.
But some think that maybe there were other messages to send him, cryptic clues sent to the newspapers or even to the police.
Oh, so it's like the killer was playing a game with the investigators, with the whole city.
Yeah.
Just wanted to keep everyone on edge, guessing what they were going to do next.
It's that classic power play, right?
Yeah.
Control the narrative, create this atmosphere of fear and uncertainty.
Yeah.
The killer was in control.
And it worked because here we are all these years later still talking about it.
Exactly.
What about the police, though? Surely they had some leads, right?
Oh, they had leads.
Yeah.
Tons of them.
Okay.
I mean, the investigation was one of the biggest in LA history.
Huh.
Hundreds of officers were assigned to it. They interviewed so many people.
That must have been overwhelming for them, trying to sift through all that information, all those potential suspects.
It was.
Did any of those leads actually pan out?
Well, over 60 people were arrested during that initial investigation.
Wow.
But most of them were quickly cleared.
Okay.
False confessions, people seeking attention, the usual chaos that comes with a high-profile case.
Right, like that mortician's assistant who confessed just to get his name in the paper.
Exactly.
Gosh, it's almost like all that media frenzy surrounding this case made the investigation even harder.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
The pressure to solve this case was immense, and when you have that kind of pressure, mistakes are bound to happen.
So with all those false leads and dead ends, did the police ever zero in on any serious suspects? Someone who they thought might actually be the Black Dahlia killer.
There were a few names that kept coming up.
Okay.
A few individuals who, for one reason or another, just seemed to fit the profile.
Okay.
And each of those potential suspects that sort of gave rise to a different theory about what really happened to Elizabeth Short.
Okay, so let's talk about those theories.
Yeah.
Where do we even begin with all this?
Well, one of the most intriguing ones, and one that comes up a lot in these books you sent, is the surgeon theory.
The surgeon theory. So are we talking about an actual surgeon, like someone who would have the skills to, do what was done to Elizabeth's body?
Exactly.
Oh.
And there was this one particular surgeon who became a prime suspect,
Oh, okay.
a Dr. George Hodel.
Oh, okay, this is getting good. Tell me more about this Dr. Odo. What made him a suspect?
Well, he was a prominent physician in Los Angeles.
Okay.
At the time, well-respected, well-connected, but he also had this dark side.
Ah, so there's more to this story than meets the eye.
There is.
What kind of dark side are we talking about?
Well, there were rumors of affairs, accusations of drug abuse, even allegations of sexual assault.
Oh, wow.
This is a man who seemed to be living a double life.
That definitely makes him sound suspicious, but was there any actual evidence linking him to Elizabeth Short?
Well, that's where things get even more interesting. His own son, Steve Hodel, became convinced that his father was the Black Dahlia killer.
Hold on, his own son. That's a pretty serious accusation to make about your own family.
It is.
What made him think that his father was guilty?
Well, Steve was actually a former LAPD homicide detective himself.
Oh, wow.
So he knew the ins and outs of investigations.
Right.
And he spent years researching the Black Dahlia case.
Wow.
Poring over the evidence, looking for any connection to his father.
And what did he find? Was there anything concrete that actually linked Dr. Hodel to the crime?
Steve believes there's a lot of circumstantial evidence.
Okay.
He points to his father's medical knowledge, his ability to perform those really precise cuts that were found on Elizabeth's body.
Right. A surgeon would definitely have the skills to do something like that.
Exactly.
But is that enough to actually accuse someone of murder?
Well, Steve also claims to have found these photos and letters among his father's belongings that he believes connect him to Elizabeth Short. He even says that a handwriting expert confirmed that his father's handwriting matches the writing on the note that was sent to the newspaper.
Wow, that's pretty compelling.
It is.
So was Dr. Hodel ever arrested?
No, he was never officially charged with the crime.
Really?
And he died in 1999.
Oh, wow.
And the case, of course, still remains officially unsolved.
So the surgeon theory is definitely intriguing.
It is.
But it seems like there are still a lot of unanswered questions.
Yeah.
What do the other sources we have say about Dr. Hodel? Do they support Steve's theory?
Some of the books and articles we have present Steve Hodel's theory as one of the more plausible explanations. They also acknowledge that there's no smoking gun.
Right.
No definitive proof that Dr. Hodel was actually the killer.
So it's still just a theory.
Yeah.
Albeit a very compelling one.
It is a very compelling one.
What about other possible suspects? Were there any other theories that came up during the investigation?
Well, one theory that kind of gained some traction was the idea that Elizabeth's murder was connected to organized crime.
The mob, Hollywood in the 1940s was practically synonymous with organized crime, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah.
And the theory goes that Elizabeth somehow got mixed up with the wrong crowd, maybe knew a little too much about something she shouldn't have.
And she had to be silenced to protect someone's secrets.
Exactly. It's like a classic Hollywood noir plotline.
It is.
A beautiful woman caught in this web of danger and intrigue.
But was there any evidence to actually support this? Any specific mobsters or gangsters that were linked to Elizabeth?
There were rumors.
Okay.
Whispers about her being seen with these various shady characters.
Yeah.
But nothing concrete.
Right.
Plus, the LAPD at the time was notoriously corrupt.
Right.
So some people believe that if there were powerful figures involved, they would have made sure that the investigation never got too close to the truth.
Okay, so we have the surgeon theory, we have the mob theory. What else?
Well, there's also the serial killer theory. Okay. Some experts think that Elizabeth might have been the victim of a serial killer who was operating in Los Angeles at the time.
I can see how that theory would make sense. The brutality of the crime, the way her body was mutilated, it definitely fits the profile.
Right.
Yeah.
And actually, one of those articles you sent over mentions that there were some other unsolved murders in L.A. around that time that had some similarities to the Black Dahlia case.
So, if Elizabeth was the victim of a serial killer, it means that the whole focus of the investigation should have been wider, right?
Sure.
Looking for this pattern of behavior rather than just focusing on her personal life.
Exactly. But again, there's no concrete evidence to link the Black Dahlia murder to any of these other unsolved cases.
Right.
It's definitely possible, but without more evidence, it's all just speculation.
So we've got these three main theories. The surgeon, the mob, the serial killer.
Yeah.
Each one has its own set of clues, its own possibilities, but none of them has that undeniable proof. It's almost like we're right back to where we started.
In a way, yeah. And that's part of what makes this case so frustrating and so enduring.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have all these pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah.
But we might never be able to put them together in a way that actually gives us the full picture.
It's almost like the Black Dahlia case itself became a victim of its own notoriety.
Yeah.
The media attention, the public's fascination, the pressure to solve it.
Yeah.
It just seems to have created this very chaotic and ultimately unsuccessful outcome.
You're right. That desire to find that quick and easy answer may have led to some missteps and some overlooked details.
Yeah.
And then there's the issue of the LAPD at the time.
Right. You mentioned earlier that they weren't exactly known for their squeaky clean image.
Let's just say there were allegations of corruption within the department.
Okay.
And some people believe that corruption might be why the Black Dahlia case was never actually solved.
Like a cover-up. To protect someone powerful who might have been involved.
It's a possibility. We may never know for sure what went on.
So we've got mishandled evidence, this tangled web of leads, and the possibility of corruption within the organization that's supposed to be finding the truth. No wonder this case has haunted people for so long.
Right. And then we have to remember, this was the 1940s.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, forensic science was just in its infancy.
That's right. They didn't have the tools and the techniques that we have today.
No DNA testing, no advanced fingerprinting, no security cameras.
It makes you wonder if, with today's technology, we could finally, like, crack this case wide open.
It's possible if they had DNA evidence from those letters or from the crime scene,
Yeah.
we might actually be able to identify the killer.
Imagine if they could run those fingerprints through a modern database.
Yeah.
We might finally get some answers.
Yeah. But even with all our advancements, there's no guarantee.
Right.
Time has passed. Witnesses are gone. Memories fade. It's a race against time,
Yeah.
trying to piece together a puzzle when some of the pieces might be lost forever.
It's a sobering thought, but even if we never definitively solve this mystery, the Black Dahlia case serves as this chilling reminder, you know?
Yeah.
A reminder that sometimes the most horrifying monsters walk among us, hidden in plain sight.
And that even in the city of dreams, nightmares can take root.
Elizabeth Short was a young woman with hopes and dreams, just like anyone else.
Yeah.
And her story was cut short.
It was.
It just leaves behind this void of unanswered questions.
It does, and I think that's the enduring legacy of the Black Dahlia case, you know?
Yeah.
It forces us to confront those limits of our understanding, that darkness that exists in the world,
Yeah.
and the mysteries that might never be fully solved.
So what does it all mean? I guess it means that some secrets might stay buried forever, but it also means that we should never stop searching for the truth.
Absolutely.
Never give up on seeking justice.
It's crazy to think, you know, even with all this information, all these theories, we're still no closer to knowing who actually killed Elizabeth Short.
Yeah. And it's easy to get lost in all of that, isn't it? The theories and the speculation.
Mm-hmm.
But we got to remember, there's a real person at the heart of this.
Absolutely.
A young woman whose life was brutally cut short.
It's a sentiment I see echoed in a lot of this research you sent over.
Yeah.
The Black Dahlia case became such a sensation, you know, a spectacle almost, that Elizabeth Short herself almost became like a secondary character in her own story.
Which is a tragedy in itself, don't you think? I mean,
It is.
to be remembered more for the mystery of your death and for the life you lived.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so important to try to look past all that sensationalism, you know,
Yeah.
and try to understand the human cost of this crime.
You know, I'm curious, you mentioned earlier some of the articles talked about the limitations of forensic science back then in the 1940s.
Yeah.
Can you maybe talk about that a little more?
Well, I mean, for starters, they didn't have DNA testing.
Right?
Imagine if they could have collected DNA samples from the crime scene, from the letters,
Yeah.
from that package that was sent to the newspaper.
That would have been a game changer.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, they might have been able to identify the killer right then and there.
It's definitely possible. And, you know, they were limited in other ways, too.
Oh, really?
Fingerprinting technology wasn't nearly as sophisticated back then as it is now.
Right.
We've got these massive databases today, you know.
Yeah.
They can compare fingerprints from a crime scene to millions of records, just like that.
Wow.
Back then, it was a much more difficult process.
Right. So even if they had collected fingerprints from the scene, which we know they didn't because the killer was so careful about wiping everything clean,
Mm-hmm.
it wouldn't have been as easy to find a match.
Exactly. And then you also have to consider the limits on communication and information sharing.
Yeah.
You know, police departments today can easily share information, collaborate on cases.
Yeah.
Back then, things were much more fragmented.
One of the articles mentioned that the LAPD was notoriously corrupt. Do you think that could have something to do with why this case is still unsolved?
It's definitely a factor that some experts have pointed to. If powerful people were involved,
Yeah.
you know, or if there was some kind of cover-up,
Right.
it's possible evidence was planted or destroyed,
Yeah.
or witnesses were intimidated into silence.
Oh, that's a chilling thought. The truth might be out there somewhere, you know, buried in some dusty file or hidden in someone's memory, but we'll never know for sure.
It is frustrating, isn't it?
Yeah.
Thinking that the answer might be right there just out of reach.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's also a good reminder that the pursuit of justice, it's a process.
Yeah.
It's not always about finding that neat and tidy resolution.
Right.
Sometimes it's about continuing to ask questions to challenge assumptions, to never give up on that search for the truth.
You know, as we're wrapping up this deep dive,
Mm-hmm.
I definitely have more questions than answers.
Understand.
But I also feel like I have this newfound appreciation for how complex this case really is,
Yeah.
you know? The human stories that are behind these headlines and just the enduring power of this mystery that continues to captivate us.
And it is that enduring fascination, you know,
Yeah.
that keeps this case alive.
Yeah.
It's like a testament to our desire to understand, to make sense out of something that doesn't make sense.
Mm.
And even if we never truly solve the mystery, I think the Black Dahlia case will continue to remind us that there is this darkness that can be lurking beneath the surface
Yeah.
of even the most glamorous city.
It's a stark reminder that sometimes the most horrifying monsters walk among us.
They do.
And even in the City of Angels, nightmares can take root.
They can.
Yeah.
But it's also a reminder that we can never stop searching for that truth.
Yeah.
You know, that we always have to strive to learn from the past
Mm-hmm.
and that we can never forget the victims.
Yeah. Elizabeth Short's story, as tragic as it is, it serves as this cautionary tale,
Yeah.
a reminder of how fragile life is
Mm-hmm.
and how important it is to seek justice.
Absolutely.
So what does it all mean? I guess it means that the Black Dahlia case, despite its notoriety
Mm-hmm.
and its place in pop culture, it's still this unsolved puzzle.
It is.
A reminder that even with all our advancements, some secrets might just stay buried forever.
Sure.
But it also serves as this invitation to keep exploring, to keep questioning,